days a week and have been since March, if you can believe that. And here we are talking about Christmas. To our members and regulars, welcome, welcome as always. We are always so delighted that you choose to spend 45, sometimes 50 minutes with us so often. And for those of you who are new, welcome. I still miss seeing you in Zoom, but it is so great to know that you're out there in our very own platform on YouTube, LinkedIn, and of course Facebook as well. So hello to everyone. For those of you just tuning in, we always have such an amazing lineup of incredible and inspiring speakers, and this week is no exception. And of course, yes, thank you, Jaden. We always do a big shout out to our partners, because without you, we wouldn't have this amazing community, and it's an absolute delight to be adding more of these partners to our community every day. So today we've got the amazing Kate Harper, and I'm going to introduce Kate in just a moment. Tomorrow we have Marnie Baker coming up. So for those of you who are new, you might not know yet that we do the Digital First series on Thursdays with Sandstone, and we talk about all things digital transformation. I think as leaders, we all know it has got about this much to do with technology, and everything else is what has the impact: culture, people, structures. So we're going to be talking to Marnie Baker, who's the MD and CEO of Bendigo Bank, tomorrow. So I'm really looking forward to that. Marnie, of course, my old boss a few years ago. So I'm really looking forward to connecting with her. Then, of course, next Tuesday, we are back again for another week. And Tuesdays, we have our diversity series where I co-host with the fabulous Tiffany Slater. And on Tuesday, I'm really looking forward to this one. As always, we're talking to Janelle Sharples, who's the principal for the Media Sponsorship and Awards at Harper. So Janelle is going to share a lot of wisdom and a really interesting journey with Tiff and I. And of course, between now and then, tomorrow morning, we have our mentoring circle. So for those of you who are new to the community, a big part of what we do here is our mentoring circle. So we have these every month. We have a few different time slots. So tomorrow morning, we do our express one at 7:45. So this is where you can come along. You can literally talk about everything and anything. It is confidential. So if you haven't registered yet and you'd still like to, then please just register through the platform. It's super easy and you can do it all there. So I hope to see you there tomorrow morning, bright and early. So without any further ado, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce Kate. So for those of you who don't yet know Kate, let me introduce her with her formal bio. So Kate leads the Vine Partners Board. It has 20 years experience in the international board consulting, assessment and executive search market. Previously, Kate worked with Russell Reynolds in Sydney and Egon Zehnder in London. Prior to search, Kate spent 12 years in investment banking, following legal study at Sydney University and later at Cambridge. She currently sits on the council of St Andrew's College at the University. Kate is committed to assisting commercial, high-growth and profitable entities to secure outstanding leadership talent to provide best practice services to her clients. Kate invests significant time to understand experience and culture. She also invests in talent team and has a particular interest in the augmentation of technology and digital skills in the boardroom. Kate holds a BA and LLB from the University of Sydney and an LLM from Cambridge. She's a graduate of the Australian Institute of Company Directors, a qualified Savile Wave administrator, and holds executive coaching qualifications from the UK. Wow, Kate, there is a lot there. So good to have you here. And sorry, everyone, a bit about that background noise I think that was there. So, Kate, welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Now, as I was saying to you before we went live, it's always great to hear the bio, but it's so much more interesting hearing in your own words about your journey. And, you know, our community here, we've got leaders of all sorts and stages. We just love the real life journey. So what led you to this point? And you can say wherever you like.
Well, I'll try and keep it a bit brief, and I think hopefully I'll be able to be of most interest to your audience through the questions that they ask. But I think it's fair to say, when I look back on my career, that I wasn't one of those strategic operators, or I didn't plan things strategically the way I advise people to do now. I did an arts law degree because I wasn't really sure if I wanted to be a lawyer. I came from a family of lawyers and I was the youngest. And so when I graduated, I actually took a job with Macquarie Bank, but I had always wanted to travel and study overseas. So I applied to do a Masters of Law at Cambridge and was very surprised when I got accepted. So I went over there with a view to doing just 1 year and come back and work for Macquarie Bank. And of course, if I'd done that, I'd probably be retired and living in the Bahamas now. But I decided to stay in the UK. And I think what kept me there was, firstly, I'd had a wonderful year at Cambridge. And secondly, at the time, it was the mid-80s, and there was a lot of change happening in the financial services industry. And I felt myself being more attracted to that industry than to law. The all the American banks were coming in, all the European banks were coming in. They had this thing called the Big Bang, where the stockbroking entities were all being sort of privatized and split up. So there was a lot of recruitment across a variety of different disciplines, and students with law degrees were in high demand. So I found myself joining Hambros Bank, which no longer exists, and I worked there for a number of years in their capital markets area. So raising capital in the international markets was very much a growth area in finance. And so I think that I've always been attracted to growth areas, no matter what industry. I've been in 2 industries. One's financial services, and then the next one now is obviously in the recruitment and search industry. And I had 15 years of exceptionally good time working in financial services in the 80s and the 90s. It was stimulated by the fall of the Berlin Wall and a lot of business then taking place with privatizations across Eastern Europe. So all the banks had more than enough work to be getting on with. I found myself moving from one bank to another in the team that I was operating in. It was very much a time when new banks were popping up. They were hiring existing teams. I was in a team at Westpac, and we all got hired to a place called Nations Bank, which was a very aspirational bank based in the South, North Carolina, and of the US. And whilst I was there, the bank merged with Bank of America, and I was made redundant. And I really didn't know what to do at that point. And I wanted to stay in finance, but I just wasn't sure if it was going to be the right career for me going forward. I'd met my now husband. I was thinking along the lines of having a family. I just wasn't sure that investment banking was going to be compatible. I was going to move country. He lived in Paris. I lived in London. So I moved over to Paris, and then within a couple of years joined the recruitment industry with a firm called Egon Zehnder. And I really didn't know if that was the right industry for me. It was a trial period for about 2 years, and it took a while to adapt. But I think what I recognised in myself was that I'd always had a great interest in people and HR issues. And so this gave me the opportunity to learn and to work across a different range of clients. And because I'd been doing transactions within banking, this is quite transactional, this work as well. You work on searches and it's sort of, you go from one to the next. So they're discrete projects, and I really like that. I also had the capability to do that work from home. And we were very fortunate that when our son came along, and he was born in London, by the time he got to 2.5, we thought, actually, we'd both grown up in Australia. We wanted to return to Australia. It wasn't through any foresight of foreseeing the GFC, but we returned at the end of 2007 and have been living here since. And I've been working in the recruitment industry since then, firstly, mostly at an executive search level to start with. And then as my own cohort have all started to move out of executive roles and into board roles, I've been much more focused on boards, which I've been doing for the last 3 years. And my real passion is to really advocate and help women position themselves for board roles going forward.
That is a great synopsis. I've got lots of questions. It's always, I don't know which to pull first. So tell us a bit about, and I love how you started out saying, I wasn't really one of those strategic planners like I actually recommend now. That really, it resonates with me, because I think I was only saying on yesterday's show, when you get grads or, younger people and they sit there and they say, how did you plan your career, Alex? Like, what led you to this point? I'm like, well, it was a bit organic, and I kind of did something, and then another opportunity came, so I grabbed that. And I didn't have a linear plan either, but I think it sounds similar to you. You take an opportunity and grab it, and then that leads to opportunities as well. What did you find was when did you figure out what your transferable skills were? Because, and the reason I ask that is that a lot of our community, like I was sharing with you earlier, they're in different phases of their career trajectory. They're looking at potentially the next role, whether it's onto the C-suite or board roles. And I really want to talk a bit about that with you as well. Or it might be going from industry to industry, as you've shared. When did you figure out that, you know what, I've got this skill set? You alluded a bit to the project work and the transaction work, but what point did you go, you know what, I can actually take these skills that I've got and actually apply it to a whole different industry really successfully?
I think I'd always worked in sales when I was in banking and marketing. So it was always client relationship, client development. It was probably less, it was more of the relationship manager than the hunter style of sales. So I had developed relationships with treasurers in corporates and talked to them about their balance sheet management and how to use capital markets and derivatives and other things. So that technical experience was useful, but I didn't carry on with it when I moved into my second career. The underlying skills that I've always used in my second career have been in and around building relationships with people and relationships of trust, and quite broad relationships, even though what I offer is a narrow area of what they seek in terms of advice from their consultants. I'm also able to help them in other areas of where I don't have expertise. So I'll introduce them to other experts who can help them, who I think are going to be able to work well with the client. So I always try to offer something more than what my specific area of expertise adds. And I think that helps you to develop a really trusted relationship, to become that trusted advisor to your client. So that's a skill set that carries on all the way through.
I love that you talk about that relationship and that network, because a lot of what we talk about, in our community, is the importance of building those intentional networks and building relationships over time, not when you need someone. So, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, because I'm sure you probably in your career, maybe not so much now, but in your recruitment career pre more the board roles, I'm sure you would have seen women and men probably who have either been made redundant or want the next role, and they haven't actually invested in their networks. So it's the worst time to start to build networks, I think, when you're kind of potentially at the bottom ebb and you're looking for that next thing. So we talk a lot with our community about the importance of, really intentionally building out networks. What can you, as you say, what can you give other people? What can you put out there? Because then when you need those networks, you find that they're actually already there and you can activate them. What tips have you got around really building those intentional networks? I guess at any stage of your career, really, because I remember I fell into the trap when I was still in corporate, thinking, well, I don't have time for that. My job's so busy and I don't have time. And it was, I remember, luckily I had still the time to realize that was a mistake but it was very easy to let networks go, I think, because you're busy. And I think that is such a big mistake.
It's a huge mistake. And I also put it in the same category as thinking about and managing your own superannuation. It's just something you don't want to think about. It's just over there and you'll think about it later. Networks are going to be the most important thing to you as you go through your career. And I let my networks lapse when I left Australia. And what I didn't understand when I was overseas was actually what a network-based environment Australia is, and how that helps you at every step of your career. Because the market in London is very big, you've got little networks that aren't all connected. But in Australia, you can almost join every single dot in some way. And so I would advise anybody, if they were thinking of going overseas, to make sure that they really work on their Australian network. Make sure that, travel at the moment is obviously challenged, but in a perfect world, if you're able to come back and meet with people, have coffee, and you can communicate all the time virtually now anyway, so you don't even need to come back. I think it's really important to set aside time every week to network with somebody who you can give something to and who they can give something to you too. It's got to be a two-way flow. I would also recommend that people set up mentoring relationships, which is more of a one-way flow. But I think that those relationships are really helpful as you go through your career. If you've got a role model that you can turn to and ask for advice about certain things when you're presented with decisions, what are the most important things to think about. Sometimes you might be thinking too much about money. Sometimes you might be thinking a little bit too much about wanting to work for some person in particular or some particular brand without actually looking under the hood and seeing, actually, is this really the right organisation for me? So I think, I totally echo the power of the networks and how you might do that. There is so many different ways. I can talk about how I'm doing it now. And one of the areas that I've invested a lot of time to assist me with my passion to help advocate for more women in the boardroom is to develop my female networks. And also at the same time, I've tried to educate myself in and around things digital and technology, because that's not an area that I grew up with. But I've seen from talking to boards and chairs how important it is to have a level of capability in the boardroom. And Australia is a small market. We are dominated by the major global players. So we have got our own technology that's been developed, but it's obviously a little bit sporadic. So I think the way that I've developed networks in those areas have been to go on study tours. So I've been over to Israel with the Australia-Israel Chamber of Commerce, and there was a group of 40 women in that group. It was fantastic on all levels. I learned a lot about technology overseas, and I met a fantastic group of women who I am in contact with all the time, and we all help each other. And it's fair to say that once we got back from that trip, about 3 or 4 jobs changed as a result of that trip. Last year, I went to Silicon Valley again with another group of women. So for all the men on this call, if there are any, I apologise, but this is very female-centric, what I'm saying. And that, again, was a trip to Silicon Valley with 40 women. More of them were executives than non-executive directors. But again, really talented and a great network, and great networks for them as well. We all have our reasons for developing networks. For me, it's about spotting the talent, where it's coming from, knowing where the current talent is, where the talent of the future is going to come from. So I think, you can do it in different ways. I think another area that is really important to think about is the concept of continuous learning, because as graduates come out of university now, we all know that they're going to be the generations that will take, probably have 4 or 5 jobs in their career, if not more. And the reason why this will happen is because of the pace of change across a number of different sectors, and financial services is no exception. So there's a lot going on in financial services in terms of the development of technology, whether it be AI, whether it be data, whether it be cybersecurity. And so I think for everybody that wants to stay in finance, think about how you're going to remain relevant in the industry that you're in. What are the areas that you're going to have to perhaps reskill or upskill in to be able to stay, relevant to the organisation you're in, and also to be able to lead teams of people who are coming in with this technological background. So I think it's really important for people to take it upon themselves to continuously learn as well, and look into areas where they can actually become more knowledgeable, that will be relevant to the roles they have going forward.
Thanks for sharing that, because I think this is super interesting, and there's lots of things I'd love to go a bit deeper on. Not least, I want to come back to mentors, because that's also a constant question about, what makes a good mentor, and how does it not be this forced relationship? But I want to come back to that, because I love what you're one about making time each week for networking. It is not this fluffy thing, and it's also not just having a cup of coffee with someone, virtual or otherwise. And this is why I love that you've said a few times now, it's this two-way street. It's like, I'd really like to connect with you because, and I think there's a bit of hesitation, and I think you and I were chatting before we went live about it. It is a bit of a stereotype that I think women hang back a bit more than men. But I actually also think it's quite true. It's certainly true in our community about, I don't want to, I don't know Kate, and I'm sure she's busy, and I don't want to, impinge on her or reach out and connect on LinkedIn because we don't. So there's this kind of hanging back. And I think what you're saying is, you've got to put effort into building out these intentional networks, just like you would with anything else in your career. And I think, I'm sure you're the same. I find that especially senior people, they're happy to give of their time and to give back if it's an approach that feels considered. And I'd love to know more about your company. So I think yes, everyone listening, we're talking about this again for good reason. So I think it's putting that time in your diary every week. It's a regular discipline. The other thing, Kate, that I'd love to get a bit more into is what you're talking about around relevancy and continuous learning. And I think this is super important. Just no matter where you are, I think in your career, whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you're in corporate, whether you're in between, I think it's that mindset, isn't it, of always being curious and learning more. And I'd love to get your thoughts as well, because, you know, of all your personal experience and also in terms of your career for others, I really feel, I remember when I transitioned from being a leader in an organisation to being my first group exec role. And it really hit me then, it kind of probably sounds obvious, but it hit me then that you've got this functional role as a senior leader that you've got to be really good at. And depending on the role, that could be quite narrow or it could be quite broad. But the minute you get onto an exec team, you have to understand, even if you're not the CTO, even if you're not the chief marketing officer, and that's not your discipline, you have to understand enough, because that's your role in an exec role, is that's the hat you're wearing, not your functional role. You know, you're making decisions on behalf of an end-to-end organization. And, you know, when you transition to board roles, as I'm sure you can sort of talk a bit more deeply about, your role is different. It's not so operational, but you're signing up to understand how to make decisions for the good of the company, the shareholder, the direction. So you can't just say, look, technology is not my bag. Like, you can't do that. What are some tips there for women, especially, that are looking to either transition from, you know, into that first exec type role, or from, you know, that exec type experience to the board? Can we go a bit deeper into continuous learning and maybe some of the skills and the attributes that over the years you've really, you know, when you're spotting talent and working with women especially, what is it that you're seeing really stands out?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of skills that really stand out that enable people to be successful, whether they're moving on into an ELT role in their career or whether they're going from executive to board. And that is having that curious mindset, as you said, and taking the time, investing time to understand other areas that impact the roles that they have, what their needs are, being empathetic. So I guess if I was to sort of think about, it in terms of behaviours, it's curiosity, it's empathy. So obviously they talk a lot about empathy and the empathy for the customer. It's also the empathy for the people that you're working with, who are not only on your board but also on your executive team. And then it's also about motivating the people around you, and then it's also using your persuasive skills and being able to flex those skills. So there are some jobs that require you to be very much command and control, as you know, but then there are others where you might be a minister without a portfolio. So you have to have much more soft influencing style. And I think being exposed to different styles of influencing is really important if you're on an executive team. And that comes about from being aware of the needs of the other business divisions that you're working with. If you're thinking about moving from an executive role into board, then the most important thing to do is to just be sure you haven't got another executive role in you. I think I see a lot of people who have come out of a big role and they're just not quite sure whether they want to do a CEO role or try and get a CEO role or an MD of a divisional role before they decide to go on boards. If they really want to do it, then they should do it. You've got to be really clear that if you're going to be leaving executive life and going into board roles, that what you're going to be doing is entirely different. It's all about advising, soft influencing, mentoring management. It's not the doing. And some people love the doing. Some people love being involved in the decision making, working with the team, helping, talking to the customers. Working at a board level is not about that at all. It's being nose, as they say at the AICD, it's noses in, fingers out. So it's knowing what's going on, and it's being able to understand and bring a level of expertise to the board to know where you contribute at a board level, and then also to be able to influence at a board level. Some leaders find that very difficult to transition to. Some leaders who have been very much, as I said earlier, the command and control type, find working at a board level difficult. So I think the way to think about boards is much more along the lines of it's a team, but it's also kind of an organism in itself. So if you're going to be the lone voice on the team, and if you disagree with what's going on, then you shouldn't be there. Obviously, directors are there to ask questions and to challenge assumptions and to challenge each other's ideas in a respectful way. But once a decision has been made, then they have to move forward as a board. Some people find that difficult. And so I think if you're thinking about going into the governance world, say, 5-10 years down the track, you want to be thinking about how you position yourself for that now. And what is it that you will be bringing to any board? You have to think about what's your value proposition? What are you going to be famous for? If you're a CFO, or if you've got any kind of financial background, there's always going to be a role for somebody who's numerate and a role for somebody who can contribute at an audit committee level. Then there are those who might come from a technology background and who can contribute at that level. And then there are lawyers, and then there are those with the commercial expertise and leadership who will also be able to bring a lot to a board because of their knowledge of an industry and their ability to help and work and mentor management. So the best way to get a feel for whether you want to be a board director while you're in an executive role is, and many people would have heard this, so sorry if it's repetition, but it really is important to look at the not-for-profit world and look at the not-for-profit world in quite a sort of targeted way. Think about if you want to join a not-for-profit and get board experience, you want to be on a board where there are very, very sophisticated directors who are very well networked, and then they can vouch for you when you're going to look more broadly for a commercial board role. And you want them to be well networked because at the end of the day is about networks. And so it will need to be an organisation that you have great interest in because you'll be spending a lot of time on that organisation, not getting paid for it, learning a lot about it, but bringing enormous value. So that's a very good thing to run in parallel to your executive career, which once you start to look at boards, you'll be able to draw upon those that you've worked with as referees to be able to speak to your board style and your board capability. So it's very, very important to get tested in an external board. I know a lot of people sit on internal boards and often they don't have independent directors. Often they are boards that are made up of people that are within the organisation. And that's good. That's good experience, but it's not as useful as being in a completely different environment with completely different perspectives and also governance.
And I think it is really useful that we talk about this, because it's funny, isn't it? I mean, you live and breathe this, so it feels like repetition to you. But I think for a lot of our community that's just, as you say, exploring this, whether it's now or 5 years or 2 years. So really, the not-for-profit focus in your mind is really that you're getting experience. This is where you're building out networks again. Is it a lower barrier to entry, do you think, to go for a not-for-profit board? Like, why is it that the not-for-profits are kind of the first step? Is it because that they're more open to first-time directors? Like, why is that? Why is that an advantage?
Because the not-for-profit board environment is, depending on the organisation, a little bit of a mix of management and board, because they are very under-resourced usually. And I can probably hear people rolling their eyes and going, well, why would I do that? And, I think it's important to know that that's what a not-for-profit board would require, but they like people who've got recent or current management experience to bring a bit more than the board director of a BHP. So you will be working more closely with management. You'll be learning about governance. It's difficult to get a paid board role unless you've been the CEO of a company, unless you've been the managing partner of a law firm, unless you've been a partner of one of the big four accounting and consulting firms, unless you are absolutely a specialist in a certain area and you've sat at the top of your profession. If you haven't, and you don't think you're going to, then it's important to start thinking about how you can become known as somebody who brings board governance skills.
And I think this is a great conversation, because I think that what I'm taking from this, I mean, there's a lot of things, but it's just having that consideration as you get more senior in your career. And I know a lot of you out there are either, looking potentially at a restructure, or you've been made redundant, or you're just looking for that next role. I think these are really great things to think about. Start to look forward about, what you think is you. I mean, you've said so many things, Kate, what your value proposition is, what you bring to the table, what you want to be known for, where you're going to really hone those skills, your network. So this is stuff you need to be thinking about now. And I think all of this is just as relevant if you're literally on the cusp of that, your first exec role. I think these are all really, really important things to think about as well. I want to go back to just, you were mentioning before, Kate, about mentors. And I'd love to get, a couple of things. We love to hear a bit of your personal experience as well. So from a mentor perspective, have you had mentors or a mentor in your life that, that has made such a big impact, or that's left a lasting impression, or that you still work with? Like what's your experience been around your own mentors?
I'll be perfectly honest with you and say that I wish I'd had more, and I wished I'd recognised that I needed more. So there've been mentors in certain aspects, certain periods of my life that have helped me make decisions relevant to the roles that I was in. So in investment banking, I had a mentor that I worked with at Westpac, and I'm still very close to this person now. He was went on to be an MD of Solomon Brothers, and worked in banking for a very long time, and was very helpful to me as I sort of went through developments in that part of the market. And I wasn't always working in the same bank as him. And then when I moved into the recruitment market, again, it was somebody that I worked for, was a woman who was very successful, an entrepreneur, set up a business in London, which did exceptionally well in the 80s. And she remained a mentor for me as well. So most of my mentors have been people I've worked for. And what I wish I'd done when I left Australia was to have formed a relationship with somebody who was here and probably, likely to stay around for a while. Maybe someone who'd started to have a family and it was less likely they were going to move, or they didn't aspire to move, to help me keep me keyed into what was going on in the market here. And so they would have, given me the heads up of, oh, look, what's happening. These are the trends. This is where there's growth in the industry. This is what they're looking for. Because there were a couple of times when I was away when I would like to have come back, but it was never the right time job-wise. And so, that's because I really wasn't across what the opportunities were. I was so focused on what I was doing in Europe, so focused on my job there. And so I wish that I had taken more time to think about mentors, to ask people who were, older than me, more experienced than me, if they would do. And I know that people would be delighted to. I think Australians are very open to that. I think Australians are very open to sharing their experiences with people who are coming up through the ranks. And I think also for women, it's really important that you don't just have female mentors, that you have male ones as well.
Yeah, I love that you've gone there, because I completely agree. I mean, this is, men and women together. It isn't just women, it isn't just men. I think people, it's kind of the point of diversity and different backgrounds and experience, and you said before, perspectives. It's so important. I'm the same. I mean, I can sort of think back on, some people that have had a real impact on just decisions I've made. But for me, it was very much, which I think probably is common. But for me, I remember, especially as I was coming up, probably, through middle management. I remember when I was, this is a long time ago now, when I had a BDM role, and I thought, gosh, why would you ever lead a team? It's so much easier just, doing your own thing and be responsible for your own performance in your own budget. But I remember that first transition when I first had, I was leading people, and I still think back to some of those pivotal moments, I think, where I don't know if I would have actually taken the plunge if I hadn't got that tap on the shoulder from someone who knew me. It could see my ability, or could see something in me that I couldn't see myself.
Yeah.
It's time, have a crack. And then I remember my first, the first national sales role, it was the same thing. It was like, no, you need to apply for that. And that's just one lens, isn't it? But I don't know, I think when you're in it, like you said, whether you're just so consumed by the role and doing a good job, you can only see what you can see, especially early on in your career. And I think this is where having those different perspectives and wiser heads around you that see like you said, talent spotting is a big part of what you do. Like you'll be able to see glimmers in people that they might not even realise they have there.
That's right. But I also think there's the reverse mentoring concept, which is increasingly important. And that links back to what I was saying about digital and technology. So somebody who's 20 years older than you is not actually going to be able to talk much about how technology is important going. I mean, they'll have a view, but they won't be able to talk about how they've embraced it and learnt along the way. And so I do think that having relationships with people who are younger and who have real specialist levels of expertise on certain things, seeing the world through their eyes is really important too, particularly in a services related environment where you're servicing clients. So if you're in research, not so much, but I think in financial services, we are servicing clients.
Yeah.
So I think, getting to the heads of younger people as well is just as important as getting into the heads of older people.
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up, because you're absolutely, I couldn't agree more, because it comes back again, doesn't it, to this curiosity and this beginner's mindset, no matter where you are. Like, I think if you seek to understand the perspective and point of view of others and where they're coming from and learn along the way, you really can't go wrong. And I think it's very easy to fall into, it's that whole thing about, well, everyone that you surround yourself with is often a reflection of you, and who are those people that are around you, and having that diversity. I'd love to know from your career and life journey. So obviously, I mean, you have this curiosity. You've transitioned. Well, you've been around the globe. You've come back to Oz. You've been in different industries. I mean, all of that takes, I think, like there's a form of there's a courageous decision there to either leap into the unknown or say, what, I'm going to back myself, or maybe embark on the next journey where you don't actually know how it's going to turn out. Is that true for you, that you kind of look back and remember those points for you when you had a bit of a should I, could I, or have you always just gone, no, I can do it, and jumped right in?
I think I've always been the latter, and it's probably related to how I was brought up. Youngest of three, two older brothers, just had to kind of get on with it, otherwise they slapped me around. So I think that's a personality thing. I think that you either are like that or not. And I always wanted to live abroad. I always wanted to travel overseas.
Yeah.
I always wanted to meet new people. I've always been fascinated by people. So that's very much something that plays well to me. I'm very glad that I lived outside Australia and then came back, because I appreciated it so much more after I'd been outside it. I mean, I enjoyed the fact that when I was away, I was able to work in bigger markets and to see some of the best practice in the world in various parts of financial services, and to be part of an incredibly large and growing market. And when I came back, it was quite difficult. Both my husband and I found it hard to readjust, because we'd both been away in excess of 20 years. And we also realised that our networks weren't as strong as they should be.
Yeah.
And that, that was something that were we to do it again, we would have put much more effort and time into. And I am so delighted to be living back in Australia, particularly this year. I'm very proud of what the country's achieved. And I think that there's, great opportunities for this country going forward, particularly in financial services. I mean, if you look at growth markets, it's probably not the highest growth, but it is going to continue to grow. But I would always say, if you've got a bit of wanderlust in you, then go overseas, work overseas, because you will gain so much from that experience. Although coming back might be a little challenging, that's just part of the journey, and the whole journey makes up for that in so many ways.
So true, and I love that. And I think, was that challenging, the kind of the re-entry? Was it the cultural, or was it more that, as you said, in hindsight, you wish you sort of had mentors here that were kind of giving you, was it the re-entry back into a job market, or just the re-entry back into the Australian way of life after being away for 20 years?
No, it was more the job market. The way of life was fantastic, and we had a 2.5-year-old, and so it was absolutely wonderful for him. And really, on the job market, what was hard about it was talking about the experiences that I'd had in Europe and in the UK, and wanting to bring value to the role that I was in here, But because this market is quite isolated, we're in a very different time zone, it's not always so relevant. And so what I had to learn to do was to change the way I communicated some of the experience I'd had. So I might say, oh, well, in Europe, what they had was this tax law, and it meant that you could do this structured deal, blah, blah, blah. It wasn't hitting the mark. So I got better at saying things like, this is what happens, this is the situation, this is the law they have, and the way they get around it is X. Perhaps it could work in the Australian environment by structuring it this way. So always learning to adapt it to the Australian environment and way of life. And so it took, I'd say, about 3 years to feel really sort of settled back in, and also to get that network up and running to the point where it should have been.
Yes, hindsight's a beautiful thing, isn't it? But that's why we share our wisdom with everyone listening. I told you this would go fast. I say this every day. I can't believe it's, we've got 5 minutes to go. It's like this bubble that we're just having this chat. So I know that, a big part of your passion, and I think you mentioned it early on when we started, was, around helping women, around board roles, and I love that you talked about, how women can position themselves. And I mean, you've given us hints along the way the whole time, even what you just said then about, you had to take the experience you'd have from overseas markets that weren't that relevant, but then make them relevant from the point of view of the Australian market. Like, how do you make that connection? And I think that's one of the things, once you can do that. So obviously our beautiful community, we've got amazing executive and soon to be executive, and I'm sure a lot of you are out there thinking about, a lot of what we've talked about today. What next for the career? You're getting to really senior roles. What's next? Is it a board role? Is it a not-for-profit? All the things that Kate's talked about. So Kate, what's next? Like how can we connect with you? How can we work with you around these sort of things, if anyone's curious about what that next practical step is for them in this journey?
Sure. So as you said earlier, Vine Partners, we are an executive search and a board consulting boutique. The predominance of our clients are in financial services. So I run the board practice here, and my colleague Annalie Davies runs the executive search practice. So feel free to reach out to either of us. On the executive search side, our real sweet spot, our real strengths sit within investment management, funds management, superannuation. On the board side, I work very broadly with financial services, infrastructure, technology, and property clients. So it's a little bit broader than that. So again, feel free, and probably the best way to reach out is through LinkedIn.
Yeah. So again, everyone, you've got an invitation then from Kate. So take this opportunity to further your networks as well. Final question, Kate, if there's anything that that you would like to leave our community with in terms of advice, wisdom, anything that you wish someone had sort of left with you, what would it be?
Yeah, look, I think your listeners may have heard this before, but I think it's worth reiterating. There is a very clear difference between interviewing a man for a job and a female for a job. And you would have all heard this. A man will always tell you why he's the best person for it, and the female will always tell you why she can't do it. And so they'll take a position description and they might go tick, 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 cross. And so that would be the one thing they'll go to, the cross, and say, oh, look, I can do most of this, but I can't do this bit. And I would encourage all the women out there to just forget about the cross, because it's going to be an area that you're going to be able to embrace, learn. If that cross is really important in your mind, then think about a competency that you have that is analogous to it, that may be a substitute, or it can show that you've look at what the underlying competency that is required to do that cross, and then think about how you've done that in a different context, but not in the context of the cross, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I love that. And, again, it feels like you hear these things again and again, but these are the foundational things. Have a go, be curious, know what your strengths are. And I think that example is, if there's a cross, what else have you done that's similar? What is that underlying skill? And don't discount yourself because there is one cross. You might not get the role, but you're gaining experience just from that as well. So, Kate, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure chatting with you. Really appreciative of you spending your time with us, and certainly hope to see you around our community again. And for everyone listening, don't forget, Vine Partners, Kate Harper. Just connect with Kate on LinkedIn as well. You can tell there's so much wisdom here. I feel, Kate, like we've only just scratched the surface in 45 odd minutes. So thank you, everyone. Have a beautiful Wednesday. Thank you for joining us as always. And we'll see you tomorrow for Marnie Baker, tomorrow at 12, Managing Director and CEO of Bendigo Bank. And not to be missed episode with myself and Mick. Thanks, everyone, and we'll see you then. Thanks again,
Thank you.
Kate.
Thank you. Thanks, Alex. Bye-bye.